Greetings. I need my gong. Hello, all. I'd like to welcome all of you to Union Theological Seminary and this Insight Project conversation with Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer. We would be remiss if we were to begin otherwise than by remembering together that we gather on the lands of the Lenape people. We're mindful that we have long years of work ahead of us to reconnect to the people whose lands we stand upon and to do the work of reparation and learning that is still very much ours to do here at Union Theological Seminary. The Insight Project is a multi-year program series that seeks to put theology in conversation with a wide range of partners in the humanities, social sciences, and the natural sciences. At its core, Insight seeks to redefine our understanding of theology, not simply through reformulation of doctrine, but through a reframing of the imagination. And we believe that theology is at its creative best when it is in living encounter with the widest range of conversation partners on vital issues of contemporary moments. Together with public events like this one, the Insight Project also hosts a course. Dr. Kimmerer met with the students in that course, and a conference on the theme, which this year is Theology and the Natural World. Your seats contain flyers for upcoming events. Please do keep them in mind. Dr. Catherine Keller will be speaking on the political theology of the earth on March 25th, and Dr. Jane Bennett from Johns Hopkins is part of a movement in philosophy called New Materialism, which seeks to rethink even what we take to be inorganic matter as vibrant matter, as in some sense living. This, of course, is not news for many of us in the room, but for a contemporary philosopher to be articulating such a point of view is new. And it does mark a moment of transformation in contemporary Western philosophical thinking. So I hope you will be able to come to both of those events and continue the conversation that we're beginning here with Dr. Kimmerer. The format for this evening is a simple one. Dr. Kimmerer will speak to us for about 25 minutes, and then Geraldine Patrick Encina of Union's Center for Earth Ethics, and I will converse with Dr. Kimmerer before we take time to field questions from you. Our conviction at Insight is the transformation of minds and hearts takes place through encounter and conversation, rather than hearing extended soliloquies from distinguished lecturers. If you wanted to do that, you can listen on YouTube. There are many wonderful interviews with Dr. Kimmerer and extended lectures. But, you know, there's TED Talks, and you can do that if you want to. Here we want to talk and talk together and be part of a real conversation. Let me say a word about Dr. Geraldine Patrick Encina. She is scholar in residence at the Center for Earth Ethics at Union Theological Seminary, which is created and shepherded by Karena Gore. She was raised in the Canary Islands, and during the dictatorship in Chile, that's when she was raised there, and she moved to her country as soon as political conditions allowed at age 16. Soon after, she did advanced undergraduate studies in biological sciences while leading an ecological youth organization to support the struggle against the damming of the Biobío River. Later on, she moved to Mexico, where she obtained a doctoral degree in ethnoecology and then specialized on Mesoamerican conceptions of time at the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico during a 2-year postdoctoral research program. She also has worked over the last 10 years on the recovery of original ways of timekeeping in an interactive research process with Hopi specialists, the Otomi from Mexico State, and a variety of other communities in Yucatan State and Guatemala. Her latest articles have focused on star cycles and ecological cycles, followed by calendars, all of which have become intelligible thanks to an ancestral time reckoning technique recovered by Dr. Patrick Encina. I suspect you can see why she is such a stellar and fitting conversation partner to have with us in our conversations with Dr. Kimmerer. So let's welcome Dr. Encina. Dr. Kimmerer is well known, I suspect, to this audience. You didn't come here lightly. And we know her, I suspect, largely through her beautiful book, Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Wisdom of Plants. She's also the author of Gathering Moss, a natural and cultural history of mosses, which is the winner of the John Burroughs Medal Award for Natural History Writing. To read these books is to be changed, to be transformed, and to be moved. And I suspect we intuit that we're in the presence of a generous and lovely writer who shares not just conceptions or ideas, but also deeply from her spirit. Readers are granted an intimacy with the author that rarely happens outside the genre of memoir. When a writer speaks from spirit to spirit, reader and writer are bonded in common cares and common loves. And that is, I suspect, why we are here gathered together. What brings many of us here to hear Dr. Kimmerer is that she knows how to speak to this moment, a moment of ecological peril, loss, and grief, and speak in a way that inspires us to action rather than to fall victim to despair and paralysis. In Braiding Sweetgrass, she gives a list of the ways we could give an accounting of all that is happening that is dire ecologically. And she has this to say: we could document every scary scene of ecological destruction and never run out of material for a haunted hayride of environmental disasters. What could such a vision create other than woe and tears? Joanna Macy writes that until we can grieve for our planet, we cannot love it. Grieving is a sign of spiritual health. But it is not enough to weep for our lost landscapes. We have to put our hands in the earth to make ourselves whole again. Even a wounded world is feeding us. Even a wounded world holds us, giving us moments of wonder and joy. I choose joy over despair, not because I have my head in the sand, but because joy is what the earth gives me daily, and I must return the gift. Dr. Kimmerer, we are grateful that you have chosen to return that gift by the gift of your time and presence with us. We are grateful for your work and your love for nature, and we joyously and gladly welcome you to our community.
Bonjour. Shabadaski gish kokwen deshnakas. Bodwe wad me kwenda. Megazedo dem min wamakodo dem. Nin mami kwenda mampi yayan. Miigwech kirigego gamijang. In that beautiful Potawatomi language that wasn't beautiful, it may sound. Is this better? Yeah. That sounds like waves on rocks, doesn't it? That beautiful language of the land. I bring you greetings and tell you that in our traditional protocol greeting that I'm a Potawatomi woman of the Anishinaabe peoples, that my name is Shabadaske Gishkokwe, the light shining through sky woman, and I am a member of both the Bear and the Eagle clans, and I am so grateful to be here with you, to share ideas about the way in which this beautiful and troubled world can be transformed by our love. It is also traditional among our people to not only begin with our language, but to begin with gratitude. So I would ask if you would, for a moment, just take yourself back to the morning when you put your feet on Mother Earth for the first time, and remember that you had everything that you need. You had that breath of morning air. You had a drink of clean water. You had food to eat. You had the companionship of one another. of the sparrows outside your window, of the sycamores, and of the clouds going by. We give all gratitude also to the Lenape peoples in whose homelands we meet today. The Lenape, we Potawatomi say the Lenape are our elder brothers. And so we give a special recognition to their teachings, and particularly in the context of this evening's thinking together, their teachings about caring for this landscape. I also want to say that I am so grateful to be here among you. This is the first time I've ever spoken in a theological seminary, and I'm really excited and loved the exchange that we had in class, and so I'm grateful. I'm really grateful for the exchange that we'll have, and I don't want to talk too long because I really do want to talk among us as a community. But John invited me to say, this was my charge, say something that you think is important. Well, but in just a few minutes. And so I think the most important thing that I want to say to begin is to let us hold together in our minds this notion that the wisdom of people who have lived in place since time immemorial does have a great promise in the transformations that we need for the world ahead, that these are medicine ways that we might learn from. And that is, of course, our goal tonight. What might we learn? And when we think about learning, we think about teachers. And so I brought my teacher with me. And I would like to introduce you to this wonderful teacher. The carrier of these thoughts tonight is Wiingashk. The sweetgrass of our people. That word Wiingashk actually means, it has connotations of the sweet fragrance of sweetgrass. It's an invitation to ceremony, and it also talks about the way it is in these wet meadows. This is a healing plant. And it's particularly important that we recognize that this is the teacher. As we think about what it is that Indigenous ways and thinking and philosophies have to offer us in these times of environmental crisis and degradation, one of the most important things is to recognize that there are intelligences other than our own, the personhood of these beings around us. Why is it that we view the plants as teachers, as our oldest teachers? There's so many reasons, one of which, and contrast that, right, with the notion that plants are low and primitive and not sentient and have very little value, in a sense, in a biological hierarchy. But these plants are held as in great esteem as teachers. After all, I mean, who else can take light and air and water and turn it into food? And then what do they do with that food? They give it away. Who else are these factories of biochemicals that we know as medicines? And they give them away. These are beings who unite the seen and the unseen worlds, the above world and the below world. They are creative, they are generous, they are ancient beings. And so we refer to them as our oldest teachers. Now, in this context, as we think about how these ancient teachings bring us forward, I want to ask you a question. Who here has heard of the Branson Prize? Anybody? The Branson Prize is $25 million, now you perk up, right, to the inventor who can come up with a scheme, with a new technology that can take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and sequester it. We know we need that. Well, I know of an invention of a device, shall we say, that can take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and at the same time, it returns pure oxygen. It filters water, it makes food, and it makes medicine. It generates soil, and it generates biodiversity. And of course, it's called a plant. These plants, if we think about the plants as our teachers, we have so much wisdom and guidance in these times of climate chaos. It's important to know, again, going back to our beautiful language, that the name that we have for plants generally speaking, like the plant kingdom. The word that we use is mishkikin. And mishkikin means medicine. Medicine is the blanket term for all that grows, all of these healers. It's important to remember that not all that medicine is for us. There's tree medicine and frog medicine and mycelial medicine and grasshopper medicine out there as well. And you know, when we take that word mishkikin, the medicine word for plants apart, you know what it means? It means the strength of the earth. That's the medicine. The medicine is the strength of the earth and our listening to the earth and thinking about what does Skokmikwe have to teach us about how we might go forward. I also want to say about Weengosh that in our creation story, this is the first plant that grows on Mother Earth. We think of this as the hair of Mother Earth. And this is why we almost always see sweetgrass in this form, as a braid. Because I ask you to think about the last time someone braided your hair, or you braided someone's hair, and that tenderness that flowed between you, and that recognition of the desire for one another's well-being. That's why we braid sweetgrass. It is this tangible representation of our care for Mother Earth. And each of those three strands, we understand there's lots of different interpretations of it, but as wholeness of mind, body, and spirit coming together in order to celebrate and care for Mother Earth, all in wholeness. And as you know, if you've read Braiding Sweetgrass, for me this braid also refers to different kinds of knowledges for how we care for the earth, of indigenous knowledge, scientific knowledge, and again, back to this starting place, the knowledge held by the plants themselves, this idea of the personhood of plants and indeed of all beings, a theme that I'll be referring to. And the fact that we view this plant as our teacher, again, invites us to consider ourselves as one member of the democracy of species. When we think about many of the conventional formulations of what is humans' position in the living world, it's at the top of the pyramid, right? It's at the top of a biological hierarchy. But in the worldview of my peoples, there is no such hierarchy, that we are all together in a circle. We are all together in a circle, which is why we often gift one another the sweetgrass braid in this way, bound into the circle, to remind us that we are all related, that we are all kinfolk, that no one is above the other. And I want to particularly emphasize this because I think problematic within the Western worldview that is driving our extractive economies is the notion of human exceptionalism. Is that there is one species among the 200 million species with whom we share the earth, that there is one species who is somehow more deserving of all of the riches and diversity and so-called resources of the earth, and that species is us. Human exceptionalism is at the root of many of the sources of crisis that we share, and so this teaching becomes really important. One of the oldest environmental conservation philosophies comes from the Haudenosaunee, who also think about this circle. They think about the earth as the earth is like a bowl of berries, and it is one bowl and one spoon. It speaks of the fact that there are finite limits to that bowl, to the gifts of the earth, and that we are all taking from them, but that it also speaks of justice, because there's one spoon for all of us. It's not a big spoon for some people and a little spoon for others and crumbs for others. It's one bowl and one spoon. And so our thinking about justice for the living world is tied very closely, of course, to justice for one another. This circle also holds an important notion in terms of thinking about the worldview of creation as ongoing. That creation is happening all of the time among all of our relatives in this circle. Creation is ongoing revelation because the land all around us, all of the world within this circle is sacred. The sacredness of plants and animals and water and mountains are symbolized in this medicine wheel, in this hoop. And this too is an idea which is central to indigenous ways of knowing that has largely been replaced in the Western world. Because when we think about land in the Western world, what's a term that comes to mind? What is land? Property, exactly. Land as property, land as capital, land as natural resources, right? But when we think about land as sacred, it has both material and spiritual dimensions. The land is our library, the land is our pharmacy, the land is our home, it's the place of our ancestors, it's the place of our descendants, right? It is everything, it is all of our provisioning, it is a source of identity. And very, very importantly, embodied in these symbols is a culture of responsibility for land, not rights to land. Never property, never rights, but responsibility. Because it's also understood that within this wheel, within all that is held in the sacred creation, there are 4 quadrants. You've probably all seen the medicine wheel, which are, I don't have time to talk too much about it today, but it's made up of dualities, right? Of light and dark and fire and water and men and women and old and young, all of these forms. And right at the center of that wheel stands every being. And the job of the human people is to keep all of those things in balance. All of those things in balance. And that is our work. We are essential givers to this community in balancing. So what that means is then when we take from the world, what do we also have to do? We have to give to the world. When we harm the world, we have to repair it. When we wound the world, we have to heal it. And this leads to these notions of reciprocity and balance and manoba madisiwen, be living in a good way and keeping the balance. And when we think about balance, I think this also intersects with what I understand to be the long and powerful tradition here at Union of coupling spirituality to seeking justice. And the sacred nature of all beings leads inherently to the pursuit of justice for all of those beings. Not justice for ourselves, but not only for ourselves, but as my teacher, Audrey Shenandoah, said it, we seek justice not only for ourselves, but for all of creation. And so one of the things that I also wanted to speak about is when we think about the injustices associated with the extractive worldview that we are all embedded in and to some degree complicit with, try as we might to extricate ourselves, is the inherent injustice, let's simply put it up, wrecking the world. The injustice of wrecking the world. Not only for all of those other beings, those plant beings, those animal beings, and for humans as well. We are perpetuating genocide of the standing people, of the flying people, of the 4-legged, the 6-legged, the many-legged, the no-legged, and the 2-legged. And so care for creation is inherent justice making in repairing the damage that we do, particularly, as you know, as evolutionary biologists tell us, we have entered the age of the 6th extinction. Where do you know how many species a day are lost as we wreck the world? About 200 species every single day. So what is our responsibility as members of this democracy of species, given the responsibility to be in reciprocity, to create mano bamadiziwin? One of the ideas that I want to put out among us is when we think about plants as persons, salamanders as persons, rivers as persons, These might seem like academic constructs. Well, a spiritual formulation of kinship with all beings. But how do we make that real in the world to enable justice for all of these other persons, these more than human persons? And under Indigenous leadership all over the world, there is a revolution happening that translates this notion of the personhood, of the sacred personhood of plants and insects and rivers and mountains. And this is called, of course, the rights of nature. Based on the notion of personhood of all beings, the rights of nature movement is you probably have heard about it because of the sacred Wanganui River in New Zealand, no? You know about this? Some heads, no. Most heads are shaking no. Under Maori leadership, the sacred Wanganui River in their homelands has now, using rights of nature jurisprudence, has been declared a legal person. Not recognized only as a spiritual being, as a person, but as a legal person. Did you know that the Ho-Chunk Nation in Wisconsin has used rights of nature to declare their homelands a legal person and protect themselves from sand mine fracking? These moves are afoot all over the world, all over the country. A new system of jurisprudence that is emerging out of these ancient indigenous ideas of the personhood of all sacred beings, and that they too can be protected by rights. And so this is a way in which our formulations of the person of all beings can be manifest in a legal transformation, a real legal revolution. I mean, what if the salmon in the Fraser River belonged to themselves? What if they had the rights of self-determination? What if climate refugees, like the maples in our home territories, they are about to become climate refugees? What if they had status as human, as persons, not as humans, as maple persons? And this is part of the manifestation of seeking justice out of these spiritual notions of the personhood of all beings. Let's see, what else among my important things, as I see my time going, there's a lot of important things. I want also, of course, to speak in terms of when we think about the justice for our more than human relatives, all of these other beings. What I do not in any way mean to put human people outside of the circle of flying people and standing people at all. Because when we wreck the world, we are also wrecking the homelands of indigenous peoples in the rainforest whose homes have been completely devastated as they're cut over and replanted in oil palms. Why? So that we in the north have cheap consumer goods. Deforestation all over the world, the draining of wetlands. I don't have to go through the litany of mining and clear cutting and aridification and all of these things that are displacing native peoples from their homelands. And I want particularly to focus on that particular wound, that particular piece of the justice puzzle. Because when you are displaced from your homeland, and your homeland is just property, you can find another place to live. It's just property, it's capital, right? But what about when the land is your identity? What about when the land is your sustainer? And your library, and your pharmacy, and your ancestors, and your future. Even more so, what about when land is the place where your responsibility to creation is enacted? It's not a place to which you have rights, but it is a place that you return the gift of life through your reciprocity to that land. And when you and that land are separated, your ability to fulfill your spiritual responsibilities on behalf of life are also negated. The ceremonies that our people do are for the renewal of the earth. They're for the renewal of all beings. And so we all suffer when that sacred connection is interrupted by wrecking the world. Eco-justice and ethno-justice are so closely tied with one another. I think I would end by saying that when we think about our reciprocal obligations, how do we meet our reciprocal obligations for being alive? This is a question which is simultaneously spiritual and material. How do we engage in reciprocity with the living world? And we have to begin taking inventory of our gifts. I often think about the fact that, the human people, we think of ourselves as the younger brothers of creation, right? We are the last ones, among the last ones to come here. We are limited. We can't breathe underwater. We can't echolocate insects at night. We can't find our way from pole to pole using magnetic navigation like the Arctic terns can. We can't even photosynthesize. But we do have gifts. We have gifts of our own. They are gifts of gratitude and attention and reciprocity and science and art and story making, of putting our hands in the earth to heal the damage that we have done. How do we rally our gifts, both material and spiritual, is the question before us, so that we might once again be living in right relationship, in mano b'madaziwan, with the earth. And I think about this as the formulation of in return for the gifts of the earth, how will we give our gifts? In return for birds, in return for berries, in return for the privilege of being alive. So those are some seeds that I wanted to plant for our ongoing conversations about transformation of worldview to mano b'madaziwan. Thank you. And let the conversation begin.
Thank you so much, Robin. There's so much to be talked about and thought about and practiced in your words. I suspect one good place to begin, there is no single place, concerns the phrase you just used, the transformation of worldviews. And I'd like to have us talk a bit about that, because I think what comes through in Braiding Sweetgrass and in these remarks is that you're inviting us to leave a worldview that is no longer, perhaps never was, particularly life-giving, a reductive form of materialism. You speak of Cartesian dualism in the book. And you're inviting us into another worldview. This is an invitation you issue in writing, in teaching, in lecturing, out of the wisdom of your having issued this invitation multiple times. What can you teach us about how that work actually happens? How do we shed a worldview that's no longer working for us and begin to enter into a new one? What's the process of that? I mean, for us here as seminarians and persons committed to a spiritual view of life, this is an exigent, imperative question. So we need your wisdom on this.
I wish I had the answer. It is the question of our time, and this transformation of worldview, and it's what Joanna Macy calls the great turning, isn't it? The turning away from the Western worldview that has not celebrated life to one that does, affirms life and regenerates life. So how do we get there? My answer is always coming from the privilege of living in the woods I think, well, put your hands in the earth. You know, the earth will teach you. The earth will teach you everything that you need to do and to become a partner again. You will know things that you couldn't know otherwise, but that's not available to everyone. So what are some of the other tools that we have? One of the things that becomes really manifest to me when I do have my hands in the earth, and manifest to you in probably many other ways, is what are those moments when you become deeply aware of what you love? And so much of our environmental discourse over the last 50 years, gosh, I'm old. I was part of the first Earth Day, and you know, so much of what we are trying to accomplish in transformation has been fear-driven. It's been driven by scarcity and fear, and I think has that changed our minds? You know, I came from the time when we thought, well, if people only knew what the consequences of deforestation were, they would stop doing it. Well, that's not true. So it isn't intellectual, is it? It isn't more information we need. It's this change in heart. And I really think to say to yourself, what is it that I love too much to lose? And what will I do to protect it? Particularly as we go through these times of climate narrows. I just think about it as the time when whatever is going to come through this narrowing, of this ecological narrowing, is what we carry. What do we pick up and carry along with us? And so we have to know what we love and invest in that. I think we also have to know that to know and to imagine that there are models that make us more happy and more whole. And to me, this is why it's so important to talk about these ancient traditions, simultaneously spiritual and material, for well-being in the land, because this is our heritage. This is we know how to do this, to live in reciprocity with the world, and so we have to reimagine it and to hold it up as something that is so beautiful and whole that we want to move toward it. Not just that we have to move away from extractive property materialism, the dangers of the Western worldview, but we have to move and dance toward something, toward that feeling of the joy of justice that comes with reciprocity. I don't know anything that makes people collectively happier than being in right relationship with land and with one another.
I'm wondering, when you say that you're planting some seeds here tonight, whether we can make the soil more fertile so that the seed will actually germinate. And what do you suggest that can make our soil fertile, so to receive your seed?
I'm really glad that you used that metaphor, because I think that one of the important things that we have to do is make visible this other way of knowing, this other balanced way of living, which is so satisfying. And that's an important role for educational institutions everywhere, where Indigenous ways of knowing are largely invisible, or if they are present at all, they are marginalized as folklore, sort of on the sides of the real deal, particularly in scientific communities. So as educators, I think that we create the microclimate in which multiple knowledges can reinforce one another. I think of it as like a Three Sisters garden. That, you know, the corn is our ancient traditional knowledge. It's the oldest knowledge, right? And it's the oldest plant, you know, domesticated plant in the Americas, right? And I think of it as the intellectual scaffold. And then Western knowledge is like that bean. But the bean, if the bean doesn't have something to climb on, it just goes haywire. And it becomes a monoculture. Kind of like the Western worldview has become a monoculture. But if we hold up and be aware of these principles of indigenous land-based knowledge, then these other ways of knowing that we have made central could have a context of values. So I think that it's our job as educators to create a pluralistic soil, plant multiple seeds and nourish them all. And to think about those principles which structure knowledge making. I think about in Indigenous teachings, we talk a lot about the 5 R's, that the principles that underlie whatever we do, of respect, of responsibility, of reciprocity, of relationship, of reverence, that those become the intellectual scaffold for the other knowledges. But students and teachers alike are responsible for planting and tending that garden.
Thank you.
Some here who know me know that a companion in thinking about these issues for me is Alfred North Whitehead, philosopher with deep love and expertise in relativity, quantum physics, and biology. And he proposed a philosophy of organism. And this particular quote comes to mind when I think about your work, and I want to ask you a question about that. This is the quote from Whitehead. When we consider what religion is for humankind and what science is, it is no exaggeration to say that the future course of history depends upon the decision of this generation as to the relations between them. We have here the 2 strongest general forces, apart from the mere impulse of the various senses, which influence persons, and they seem to be set one against the other. The force of our religious intuitions and the force of our impulse to accurate observation and logical deduction. He's naming that for a good bit of the 18th century, the 19th century, and for a considerable bit of the 20th, these 2 forces have been set at odds against each other to our collective detriment. And one of the things I see at work in your labors, in your book, in your writing, is a real quest to integrate spirituality and scientific knowledge. And yet your writing has a kind of, I don't know what to say, a kind of love-hate relationships. Some of the funniest passages in the book include, of course, the way in which you talk to the plant scientist who sometimes wears my clothes and drives my car, right? You have to tell her things that the indigenous side of you knows, that the other side of you is struggling with. And yet you also have a profound respect for the capacities of science to instruct us, to pay attention, to learn about the world. So, it's been a while since you've written the book. Could you tell us how life goes with the plant scientist who wears your clothes? And in that process, help us to understand how you think about this call to integrate the scientific and the spiritual.
I think you just did a wonderful job of that polarity and the tension between them. And one of the things that we talked just a little bit about in class today, and I want to mention again, is that it's when I try to see this unity, when that scientist who wears my clothes and I have discussion, how do I want to say this? That science, the science that I see as that can be integrated and in fact informing and be informed by spirituality, is science as a form of knowing, science as questioning, science as inquiry about what does it mean to be another being, what is your gift in the world, what is your role in the world, how are we all related. Those are science questions that to me can fuel and make richer our spiritual traditions. Scientism and the scientific worldview, this idea that rational, mechanistic, reductionist science has a corner on truth, that's not science. That's scientism. It is science married to capitalism. It is science married to Western religions of domination. That's not science. So what I try to do when I'm talking to that deluded woman is to remind her that we need to, as members of a community that is so science dominated, we need to do our work of separating science from the scientific worldview and from scientism. Indigenous peoples, for example, are inherently scientists. How else could people live so well for millennia in place? We are scientists. But indigenous science does not uncouple the observer and the observed. Indigenous science asks and answers questions about what is the right thing, not what is the true-false question. Western science, I find, to be brilliant at asking and answering true-false questions. But because science is inherently and proudly tries to be objective, to separate the observer and the observed, it means there are all sorts of questions that science simply can't answer because it is value-free. And that's where we have to turn to this integration of values with empirical inquiry. And to me, that's a new, ancient kind of science, that science which is driven by values, or has values and ethics inherent in it.
Yeah, which speaks to the wisdom of the one who we can call scientist, the indigenous person who's looking, is looking through that lens of the wisdom that they hold and carry. Mm-hmm. So you say when you went to this gathering of indigenous elders who were talking about the plants right after you had been in your own, bubble of the botanical approach that you had been instructed to. And can you share with us your experience of being there and listening to the elders who were sharing the wisdom and science about plants?
Yeah. The passage in the story that you're referring to is that after, I began from a traditional perspective about plants, then I went through scientific training and got my mind good and colonized, and began to teach botanical sciences in just the way that I had been taught. But I was invited in a wonderful, mysterious way to a gathering of traditional elders, and I was told that I could sit in the back and listen for 4 days, and it was the most amazing, intense experience, because as you say, I realized that having just earned my PhD in botany, I didn't know anything. that the depth of knowledge that was shared by those plant knowledge holders was so humbling, and that they knew it with all of those quadrants of the medicine wheel. In science, we know something intellectually, and if we can observe it and measure it, but they knew the emotional resonance. They knew the creation stories of those plants. They knew the songs of those plants. They knew that the plants were lonely for people, for relationship, for the stories to be told again, for the songs to be told again. And nothing in my science training was about songs or stories, and so it was for me transformative. I think of it as the moment of the great remembering, and that's why I had been brought there, is so that I could remember that, and it changed my life. It changed my life and has set me on the path of trying to tell those plants stories, not just create more data. Yeah.
Plants were lonely. This is a striking phrase. It resonates also with the other side. You speak in your book that we human beings are isolated and trapped as we are, experiencing species loneliness. It's another evocative phrase in your writing. So the plants are lonely, and we ourselves are also lonely. This is an immense gift of your work. I mean, many of us don't think that way. And just to name these things, I think, is a powerful gift to us, not least because at least some of us who are beginning to think carefully about attention to matters ecological are at times tempted to fall into a longing for the pristine, natural, untrammeled by the human presence. And everything in your book is, if I can put it this way, dead set against that vision. The whole of the book says this is not, in fact, a productive way to think about who the human being is and what our place in nature is. So could you talk about these double lonelinesses and how you're trying to help beings on both sides?
The double lonelinesses. I think so many of our social pathologies and collective ills are born of loneliness from each other, from the land, and from those beings. And we know that, we experience that. And imagine what it is like to be, I'm thinking of one of my good companions. What if you were this beautiful plant that had all these wonderful antiviral compounds growing in you? What if you were just fabulously beautiful, and to get on your knees and to look at the way that the stamens are arranged, you would think, oh my goodness, it's as beautiful as this chapel, if not more. And people just walk by you. They don't even see you. They don't even know the gifts that you have. The most painful and evocative way I like to explain that is, we've all been to potlucks, right? What if you brought to a potluck that blackberry pie from the berries that you picked yourself with your grandma's pastry, and it's the most marvelous gift that you have, and you bring it to the potluck, and nobody eats it? That's a wound, right? You feel lonely, you feel estranged. And that's, I think, what the plants feel, is they have these gifts. We all were given original instructions, every being, of what our gifts are and how to give them in the world. And when we as people ignore those gifts, and it's heartbreak. It's a kind of heartbreak. And so this is an invitation. It is an invitation to come back and know our kinfolk again. And that's, I think, powerful medicine. And you just have to start with one being. Come into relationship with one being, and it changes your whole perspective, because that one being then becomes the icon for all that we don't know.
So, you talk about gifts, the gifts that we are born with to give away, and the gifts that plants are born with to give away as well. But sometimes talking with Mindahi, we wonder how this can be misinterpreted when we put the message out there. So can you talk or recommend how we can include the reciprocal obligations as gift bearers and as gift receivers or takers?
Mm-hmm. I'd love to, because while there is this invitation to accept and recognize the gifts of the plants, is this an invitation to ravaging the woods of all of the beings? If we are unconstrained by our responsibilities, yes, and that's exactly what we have seen, because we think about the world as property, as if it all belongs to us. But it gets back to what I hope was my central message of the sacred personhood of all other beings. Those plants are not things. You know, the world is not a commodity of stuff. Those are beings. And so when we approach those beings, be they plants or animal beings or water, when we regard them with the same kind of respect and compassion and empathy that we have for one another, we don't treat them as commodities. We don't over-harvest, or there is some restraint on it. There, in braiding sweetgrass, there's a long and, for me, laborious chapter on the honorable harvest of how do we take from the world, because we have to take from the world. We can't photosynthesize. We have to take from the world. And the genius, the evil genius of the Western system is to objectify all of those persons. The trees become things. They become board feet, not beings. Why is that? Why does the English language it all of nature? So that we can objectify it, so we put them outside of our circle of moral obligation, so we can consume them as any way that we wish. That's embarrassing. There. But in indigenous languages and in this notion of the personhood of beings, including the legal personhood of beings, if it's your relative and you're going to take the life of your relative, you're going to do it very, very carefully and only if you have to. So all of these notions are tied together. This idea of the sacred personhood of every being becomes inherent restraint and reciprocity. If I have to take your life, I'm going to give back. I'm going to take care of your children. Yeah.
So one of the central themes that you just touched on, and it is a central theme in the book, is language. That language itself is both a potential trap and, if reconfigured, a promise. And just now you mentioned the trouble with the pronoun it, that so much of our discourse about the world is caught up in describing the inhabitants of the world as its. And you mentioned, by contrast, that Potawatomi is 70% verbs and 30% nouns, whereas English is just the converse. Mm-hmm. So there's a deep intuition here that how we speak, how we name, is integral to this business of worldview formation and transformation. Mm-hmm. But this is not easily accomplished because we're speaking in English. So there's a bit of a trap here. I'm wondering how you think about this and how do we learn these other idioms and languages? How do we become multilingual in the way that you want us to?
I'm glad you asked. I have been writing and doing some experiments with this notion of animacy of indigenous languages, in which we could not speak of sweetgrass as it or sunny as it. We use the same grammar that we do for our families. And so I began thinking about how could we shift worldview with language. And working with my language teacher, the late Stuart King, I asked him, so what is our word in Potawatomi for just a being, an earth being. And he said it's Bamadazi Aki. And it's a beautiful word, an earth being, but I didn't think it was going to work in English. But within Bamadazi Aki, Aki is our word for land. And what about Ki, K-I? What if, with inspiration from indigenous languages all over the world who speak respectfully of the animacy of the world, what if we had a new pronoun of ki? So we could say he, she, ki, and it. So ki would be the word that we use when we can't say it about our beloved teacher, our relatives in the living world, but we don't want to say it about them, so we can say ki. Then in Potawatomi, one of the ways you can pluralize becomes really useful here, because we will also need a plural form for ki, and the way that we pluralize is to add an n. And so we get kin, so that we can speak of the living world with the collective pronoun of kin. Kin are flying south for the winter. Kin are rising up from the earth and flowering next month. So that every time we speak of the living world, instead of objectifying and pushing outside our circle of empathy, we bring you in. I've been doing experiments with my students about this to see how does it work. Is that acceptable? It's hard to change your language, but we make up new words all of the time, and we leave behind words that we don't need anymore. And I don't think we need to call the living world it anymore. And if ki and kin can help, so be it. And I just really laugh that somebody who hated grammar in all of my classes is now advocating for the pronouns of the revolution.
Would it retain any function?
Oh, yes.
For what? What would we
Paper
name?
clips.
Paper.
Of course, we do need it. And in many of the animate indigenous languages, there are ways to speak of that which is not alive, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's a very useful word, but for it to dominate our worldview is not useful. It's destructive. And so back to your notion of how do you transform a worldview, maybe in how we speak, maybe in just that moment when we choose to say ki instead of it. Since proposing this pronoun, I have to tell you that so many people have reached out and said, well, you know what ki means? In my language, in my language, in my language. And, it is the name of the Sumerian earth goddess. It's an alternative pronunciation for chi, the energy, life force that flows through everything. I was just with Tohono O'odham students in the desert, and they said, that's our word for home. So there are many resonances for that sound that, to me, helps it feel right. So give it a try.
Yeah. Yeah. In Yanyu Otomi language of Mindahi's peoples, Nzaki means vital energy. Nzaki. Yeah. And king in Maya language, Yucatec, means day, sun. Yeah. So
there's something there.
It's a very primordial sound, ki. Yeah. I was thinking about when you were saying that your responsibility to creation can be negated when you're taken away from your land, and the wound and the suffering that this creates. How do we heal from this wound that is sometimes transferred even from generation to generation? You were earlier in the conversation with the class talking about how we really need to sit with our wound in order to to go forward, and that even the settler colonizer carries a wound. How do we create the conditions for the healing of everyone, either if we're in one or another historical role?
One of the things that comes to mind in answering that really heartfelt and heart-rending question of how do we heal, particularly on both sides of that wound, the colonizer and the colonized. What comes to mind when I hear your question is how can we support Indigenous peoples who are claiming and reclaiming their land rights, their responsibilities to care for land again. If we think about the passion of Standing Rock, which grows out of that moral responsibility, if people are meeting tear gas and water cannons with prayer, that comes from moral responsibility to creation, to the land, to the sacred life of water. And so we stand with Native people who are taking the lead. We become good allies. And I think that promotes healing on both sides, because the wound is present. We say, yes, this is a historic and ongoing injustice. And so we stand together against that. And in that way, we come to belong together. So I think allyship is an important way. Reparations, return of land, recognition of land rights. It's a powerful act of healing for settler and for Indigenous peoples alike.
One of the great gifts of your book is that the word joy occurs in it not infrequently. I do have your book on Kindle now, and I wish I find myself thinking, I wish I'd done a search for joy in the book to count and...
Do a search for joy.
Yeah. I bet the number of occurrence would be quite considerable. And I think that's poignant, it's touching, it's healing, because a great many of us live, particularly the more we learn about the ravages that are being inflicted on Mother Earth, the more many of us live in what feels often like inconsolable grief. And it just takes up residence in the spirit, and it's often, an early, if not the first thought in the day for those who are called to this work. It can be dispiriting, and we hear that climate scientists in particular, are suffering from extraordinary rates of depression and are facing some real emotional difficulties. Yet, in the midst of all of this, you dare speak of joy. And I think that's partly why many of us are here. We hear something in you that refuses to give in to despair. What is it that enables you to do that, particularly when you are so attuned to the dark side of what is happening? So what fuels in you this capacity for resilience and joy, and how can we ourselves take that into our lives and our work?
I think I would begin by answering that to return to the name of plants in our language. Medicine. For me, the plants and the living world are medicine for that wound. I mean, when we love the world, you love the old growth forest, and you therefore feel the wound of deforestation in a visceral way. And so how do I heal that when I'm walking through a clear cut? I don't heal it right away. First of all, I feel it, and I want to lie down on the ground and cry. But when I'm lying down on the ground crying, there are mosses growing in the dead wood. How courageous! Their world has been taken from them. They've been victims of this violence. And what are they going to do? They're going to start over. And so, for me, the joy comes from the courageousness of the living world, the generosity of the living world. And it also, I think, comes from when I think of my own darkness about what is to come, when I think of the world that my grandsons are going to live in. And it gives me such pain, as it does for all of us. What seems to me so important is that those little kids know how to love the world. Their world is going to be diminished. When I think that my grandsons could live in a world that doesn't have hermit thrushes, I can hardly even bear that. But you know what? That means they gotta love crows. They gotta love crows. You know? Because that's what they will have. And it is a deficit. It is our own deficit in loving the world that has brought us to where we are today. And so that choice to love in a diminished world is how I go forward.
Thank you. On that wonderful note, can we invite questions from the audience? Please join our conversation. I know that many of you have been carrying questions you've been wanting to ask Robin for as long as you've had braiding sweetgrass. Now's your chance. And there's a microphone being brought. So.
I'm so grateful to hear your words. Thank you. And I want to ask, I know that we have more and more people coming into our world, and that more and more people are moving from the rural areas into the cities. And that in some ways it's a good thing because we have less ecological footprint, or that's the thinking, the way it goes. But then I think more people in the cities, and I worry about losing connection to the land and increasing connection to the concrete. So I wonder if you want to share your thoughts about that.
I would simply say yes to everything that you've said. And one of the central conundrums is not only how do we maintain our connection to the living world when we live in a completely built environment, but how do we exercise reciprocity with the living world when we can't go scatter the seeds or do a burn or compost or any of those material actions that we can take? How do we exercise reciprocity? And one of the ways is that what is our currency of reciprocity when we live in a heterotrophic community like a city? It is the fact that we have to sustain ourselves by purchasing imports from the non-urbanized areas. And so the currency of reciprocity can also become our dollars, how we deploy them, if you will. But to me, that is it's just this really superficial conscious consumerism kind of idea. To me, consuming less, as you said, what is one of the things that is driving people into cities? And if we all consumed way less, we would not be driving those cycles, for example. The other thing that I think is really important is to understand that it's a fallacy to say that nature is out there and it's not here. We are nature. Our built environment is also a part of nature, and many courageous and opportunistic species have come to live with us in cities, and to embrace them. That is the nature of the urban ecosystem. One of the things that we have an opportunity to do, which quite honestly as a scientist really fascinates me, is that we are creating novel ecosystems, aren't we? We are creating systems that most species have never seen before. How will they adapt? How can we help them adapt? How can we help things migrate and move around and reassemble? Another gift that we humans have is that of restoration. And I can't say enough about the power of physically being engaged in the healing of your home place. There's nothing that makes you feel more at home than having your hands in the soil, be it a vacant lot or a median strip or a brownfield. To become engaged in the restoration of your home place is a powerful way to engage with natural systems in a way that is, I think, deeply pragmatic and spiritual at the same time.
I have a question, but it's a question of the heart, so I hope I can articulate it. I've been very moved by reading Braiding Sweetgrass, and this question has been formulating, and you just spoke about how humans are part of nature. I think it's coming from that mindset of trying to genuinely get away from the exceptionalism. And it's a question for both of you because we heard that you're studying time, so perhaps you both have thoughts on this. If we think about us really as part of the planet, and that key is somewhere in Kerr life cycle, and this wrecking of the world that humans are doing is one aspect of Earth wrecking other aspects of the Earth. Where is she? Where is Key in her life cycle? And what's going on?
I want to be sure that I understand.
I'm not sure I understand, but
your question. Are you asking from the perspective of Mother Earth? Yes?
and that we're generally not outside. It is
Right.
Western culture and colonialism and all of this stuff that we all know is sort of off and bad and wrong, but it didn't come from anywhere other than us being nature.
Gotcha. Awesome question. To me, what that speaks of is the ongoing process of evolution and adaptation. How does evolution and adaptation work, right? It works by experiments. And we've done an experiment to say what would happen if we treated the world as if it was an object. What would we do? You know, if we adopted and we lived by the Western worldview, well, the results are in. And so, right? And so it has fitness consequences. I think we are seeing the results of an experiment, and we will, adaptation will be made through differential fitness. Yeah, mistakes are corrected in the natural world, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, and I would add that it was calculated with precision by the Mesoamerican timekeepers. They knew that we were going to enter into the last fifth of the 26,000 year cycle, which is called the precession of the equinoxes. They knew that we would then eventually enter into the last 10th of that fifth, meaning the last 520 years. Precisely in 1492, year 13 read. And they knew that things would get much worse in the last 10th of those 520 years, meaning last 52 years. So we've just been like on the clock, going deeply into this crisis, critical moment, out of which we would have to emerge after having learned the lesson. So we're now accomplished that closing time in 2012, 2013, and according to their understanding, it will take full 13 years for all of us as a single, like, great being to elevate our consciousness and learn wisely from what didn't work, and identify what's within us that will really elevate the way we interact with one another, which is out of love, purely out of love. That must be what we come up with by 2026, that we're all like deeply back in love and in joy.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. My name is Sarah, and I'm reading your book as part of a book group among some Hebrew priestesses that are trying to better understand our relationship with the earth and colonization and decolonization. And I work as an urban farmer in the schools here in New York City. And I'm curious to your thoughts about the role of, you might say, over-intellectualization and valuing things that you can't touch and hold, valuing ideas and intellectualism or scientism over what we might call manual labor. And if you could reflect on how revisiting the value of manual labor might also help us connect back to the earth and our society, connect back to honoring the earth.
Great question, and yes, you know, I think back again to that medicine wheel, where on the medicine wheel we honor that we have these multiple ways of knowing. The mind is just one of those ways, right? There's also our physical body knowledge, emotional knowledge, spiritual knowledge, and that we're told that if we try to understand the world with only one of those, in fact, without using all of them, then we really don't understand. And the wisdom of the body, particularly the wisdom of the body in concert with the wisdom of other bodies, is such, a fertile learning. So absolutely, I feel like having your hands in the earth, the tangibility of making a basket, of making medicine, of cooking food, of weaving cloth, of sewing your clothes, all of those things that are so deeply, deeply satisfying. I think that we have to reclaim that kind of knowledge and the honor of that kind of knowledge again. Do you all want to add to that as well? No?
Hi, thank you. As a city dweller, I have a very practical question. As a city dweller, one of the ways that I'm trying to return to earth is through cooking. And I'm very frustrated with my relationship to it, and it's very easy not to do in New York. And I'm just wondering how, if you have advice on how you or how we can do justice to food once it's severed from the plant, and when we're not doing the harvesting and we're not in the land. Advice on cooking.
Cook. You're receiving the gift, right? Some of the precepts of the honorable harvest, I think, make food taste even better. The recognition of the way in which food connects you to the life that, whatever it is you're cooking, is a life, and really feeling that, even if it's just a little thing on your countertop, to pay attention, I think is a way to do justice to the gift of food. Make it beautiful, make it feed the body and feed the land at the same time. Good for you for that recognition, because I think the food movement is one of the most powerful ways that we have of reconnecting with the land. Honestly, when the local food movement began, I was very excited about it, but I didn't think it would endure. My goodness, it has endured and become a whole movement, which is, I think, very healing. So I endorse your efforts. And I guess what I would also say, because you said this is a pragmatic question, the not wasting. We know that food waste is a huge generator of greenhouse gases, right? It's a huge piece of food injustice in wasting food. So the creativity that comes in using everything is really important too, I'd say.
Aloha mai kako and talofaloa. My name is Brandon. I greet you from my homeland of Hawaii and Samoa. I want to preface this by saying that I think I know the answer deep down inside, but I want to hear how you choose to respond to this. When I think about the colonial project and the irreparable damage it did to our peoples, when I think about the lives that were stolen, the genealogies that were lost, when I think about the languages that were stripped, and the knowledge that was suppressed and taken away, my question, and a lot of my suspicion, especially in the institution and the academy, is like, when we talk about these things, like why now? Or like why are people entitled to this knowledge? Like why should we give this freely? When for so long they suppressed it and took it away from us.
Such an important question, thank you. And it won't be surprising to you, I'm sure, to know that the ways in which I have really struggled with this, and I'll tell you a little story about that. It had to do with the pronouns of when I was working with my language teacher, telling him what I wanted to do is to animate English so that we could come into kinship with our other people, with our relatives. He was so angry with me, and he said, how dare you? How dare you try to have our language give back to when they try to exterminate our language. And we prayed on that together and talked about it. And it is a painful juncture to see that and to feel that. And the answer that I came to, it's only an answer for me, Brandon. I think everybody has their own way of negotiating that pain and that loss, is that for me the most sacred of things is life. Life for all of our kinfolk. And if the teachings that we can share and can give support the life, the ongoing nature of the sacred world, then we should, then I choose to give that on behalf of the other beings. I don't know that it's the right answer, but it's the way that I have thought about it. I will also say that I feel very careful and protective about what I give. Ideas of reciprocity and gratitude, very human things that are not culturally specific. This is the way people can be and should be as animal beings, right? In that case, I feel like what I'm helping people do or inviting people to do is to remember on their own who they are and what our original instructions as human people might be. But for protection of culturally specific knowledge, that I would answer the question very differently. For culturally specific knowledge, not to be shared, but knowledge that serves the continuity of life, I think should be shared.
Okay, it says wrap up. I've acknowledged 2 other hands. Can I get them real fast? We'll just take the 2 people I've acknowledged over here, maybe just real quick questions, and then we have to wrap up. So just these last 2 things.
I guess that's a good segue. I come from a teacher's college, and my question is, how does a post-human or all-human curriculum look like, and can it exist within the institution of schools that we have currently, and how can it exist in a society where we define success in economic terms?
Well, we just have to redefine it. I mean, these are all human constructs. And so we change them. I mean, that's one of the things that I try to say in breeding sweetgrass, is that these things are our choices. We can choose to allow those things to go forward, or we can say, as teachers, as administrators, as students, we say, no, we're going to rewrite that story. We can do
Last
that.
question, thanks.
Hi. I was sitting in the middle of Auschwitz and Birkenau a few years ago, and I had an elder before me, and I asked him the old language, and I asked him if we had a word for domination in our language. He immediately said there's no word, no concept, because if you have a relationship, you don't need even the word I, which is a noun or pronoun, that we use the reference of I as a verb. So we are verbs with all the relationship. So that led me to think about if there is a predatory energy, in the sense that nature is always balancing out the predator, because the predator overexploits, overeats everything, and tries to outthink Mother Earth. So this predator will be taken out sooner or later by Mother, because this predator is not listening to the original instructions. Your thoughts?
Yes, to me this is very resonant with this notion of the evolutionary experiment, and that which fails to support life is selected against. It is a powerful form of reciprocity and corrective, if you will. And it is natural law. And so much of the way that we have created our societies, particularly our economic institutions, are in direct opposition to natural law, including that energy of correction. We think that we can just grow and grow and grow. That's a metric of success, right? Well, that's ridiculous. That's not the way the world works. The laws of thermodynamics have not been repealed on behalf of one species. So yes, there are corrective energies in the world. That is the nature of reciprocity. Yeah.
It is among the things that one learns when one spends time with Robin, either in book form or in actual human form, is that gratitude is essential practice, and we have some thanks to give. I want particularly to be mindful of Mary Coelho, who is the donor who has made the Insight Project possible here at Union, and hence set the conditions for these kinds of conversations to happen. So let's thank Mary. And you can imagine that a number of people have made this kind of gathering possible. And I just want to quickly name them. Kate San, Shayna Kaplanov, and Todd Willison, and Naomi, where are you all? All of these folks played an integral role in making this event possible and welcoming Robin in our midst warmly and making it possible for our time together. And of course, I want to thank you all for coming out. The spirit and wisdom behind your questions, I think, speak amply about who you are and what you brought to this evening. So thank you also for being here. And of course, let's thank Geraldine and Robin.
I just asked for one more moment, if I might. As I told you at the beginning, I've never spoken in a theological seminary before. I've so much enjoyed the energy, the conversation, the depth of questions that just don't happen in my botany lab. But I would like to ask something of you. One of the things that, as I travel about talking to people about these ideas, one of the things that I hear over and over again is a great longing from communities, a great longing to participate in ceremonies of grief for the earth, of ceremonies of joy for the earth, of ceremonies of commitment to the earth. And what I hear from them is this great struggle to, oh, how appropriate. This great struggle to not to appropriate indigenous earth-based ceremonies, not to borrow those ways of being, but they say, but we don't have our own ceremonies to mourn the earth or to celebrate the earth. So in a community, a theological community where the study and practice of liturgy is so alive and well, I put that concern out to you as a charge to think about this longing that I have experienced in communities wherever I go for a ritual practice that allows people to come together around these issues. And when we think about the role of ceremony as focusing our attention so that it becomes intention, and that intention becomes action, and then the world changes. Your role in helping to meet that longing for ceremony can change the world. And I ask for your help in thinking about that and making it real. So thank you.
Thanks to all.